What if I told you that my most important trait for improving fast in Melee didn't come from Melee at all? Rather, it was one of my fucking high school classes that I had an F in that was probably one of the most important things that I ever had the displeasure of experiencing, and unknowingly, it set the foundations for my Melee improvement. Yeah, I'll explain more in a bit. Hey everyone, it's Kadoran, and I'll talk about my most defining trait for my personal improvement that I set my sights upon for Melee. Many consider my rise in my Melee improvement to be pretty fast, as I started attending tournaments in late November of 2016, so I had like 1 month during winter break of 2016, so really I started in 2017, and I was ranked number 70 in the world by the 2019 power rankings of the top 100. Many consider me very clearly top 30 right now, if not top 20 in the net play era, but my improvement was not always upwards. I've plateaued a couple times, but it's thanks to my particular trait that helped me get out of it and continue to improve fast. As I said earlier, my most defining trait did not come from the process of Melee itself, but rather my prior life experience. I used it since day one of my Melee career, and I still use this trait to this day. So, what is this trait, you may ask? I will start with my backstory. To explain my background a bit, I come from a typical Asian background where my parents are quite strict about my grades, though they were a bit more lax with me compared to my older siblings. Still, though, they would harass me a ton every time I didn't get an A for a course, so I always had a sense of pressure when it came to classes and grades. I really only did it just because my parents wanted me to. I was an okay student in middle school. I say I put in bare minimum effort to get like A's and B's per semester. Wasn't the brightest, but I did alright. Then my freshman year of high school, and I was supremely underprepared. I went to a weird high school that went by a trimester system, so the pacing was way faster than I anticipated. I took an honors version of geometry, and I fucked up badly. My typical habits from middle school just didn't cut it, and I was doing miserably. After the first couple of weeks, I just had a big fat F in the course. F in the quizzes and tests. I never faced anything close to that in my prior years. And frankly, my parents didn't like that either. When they inevitably found out, I was expecting a beatdown of my life. But I got something that was arguably worse. Um, they saw my grades and they were just plain disappointed. It was like they just didn't know what to do with me. That kind of look. And I remember feeling something else for a change. Instead of the intense stress of the punishment, I felt more of a disappointment purely for myself. That kind of introspection where I knew something needed to change in order to avoid this type of mistake again. To avoid being a failure and disappointing myself again. And then my most defining trait came out in that moment that I needed help. So I asked my parents how I could do better next time. They suggested a tutor. I asked my school counselor how I could salvage my grade, and they suggested utilizing the trimester system and do geometry the next two trimesters instead. And I didn't even know if that was necessarily the best advice, especially the trimester part. I was like, okay, I'll take your advice, but I just took their advice and saw that I was going in a good direction. As I was getting tutored, I asked more questions about math that I quite didn't get. And my tutor encouraged me to do so more often and also in class. Every time I didn't get something in math, I just asked and would get it clarified. And also, I still didn't quite get some stuff despite asking for more help. During my 2 semesters of geometry, I still didn't do the best. I still ended both trimesters with a B, but compared to where I started with an F, I just knew this particular trait of continuing to ask for help had to be cultivated further because it was getting me somewhere. I was actually learning effectively for the first time. I was putting in real effort. I was putting in the grind. I was starting to ask better questions. I formed better habits. I slowly learned better efficiency. I was very flexible with my thinking. I was able to critically think. And I was able to ultimately take on greater challenges because of my willingness to ask for help. I was often that kid where I looked supremely stupid for asking certain questions that seemed overwhelmingly obvious. But I didn't care because I wanted my question to be clarified. I wanted to learn what I couldn't figure out and overcome the challenges in front of me. As I cultivated my math skills, I continued to ask for help whenever I needed it. And eventually, after years of hard work, I was able to complete all subsequent math honors classes with an A. From a kid that started with a literal F to getting a 5 in a Calc BC AP exam. It's not meant to be a flex per se, but to really show that I'm not really different from most people, that I'm not some talented genius that somehow found his way to victory, but rather some confused kid that refused to give up. That I utilized the resources I was lucky to have to slowly but surely ultimately succeed. The trait for asking for help obviously spread through my other courses. I started to do better in practically everything since I was far more inquisitive. Naturally, I learned the skills needed to succeed in those courses as well. And when I got into Melee, the same habits I used in school spread to how I continue to improve in Melee to this day. I didn't know what was the best way to get better in Melee. In fact, I didn't really get anywhere in my first year playing. But as I got into Melee tournaments, I researched how to get better through video guides and forums. I stumbled upon the PPMD Smashboards thread, where I could ask all the questions I wanted imaginable, like some kind of wet dream coming true. I've asked hundreds of questions there, and I also utilize other resources like my local Mart area, where I'd form group chats to discuss things with them. I'd always ask other sources that'd be willing to ask for additional help and additional info. Through trial and error, consulting resources, making sure I was doing things right, adjusting and fine-tuning things, putting in the grind, investing in certain resources, myriads of other things to optimize my improvement, it all really stemmed from my foundational defining trait of improvement. It's asking why. That's really it. I did it hundreds of more times, maybe thousands. If you're interested more about these types of content, please subscribe to my YouTube, follow my Twitch streams to view these live, and potentially play with me as I do video battles often. Feel free to join my Discord to ask any questions and to hang out, and I hope you all do well.